Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I know we have several people still joining us online, and recognizing that it's been snowy and cold the last couple of days, and so I think some people are still coming back to their offices. But we certainly appreciate you all joining us today. My name is Ben Brown. I'll serve as your moderator today for this webinar titled "Cultivating Cost Efficiency: Fertilizer Prices and Crop Budgets for 2025." It is a pleasure today to be joined by Josh Linville, Vice President of Fertilizer at StoneX. Last week, we covered the timely topic of poultry markets and egg prices and diseases. Today, I think we have a really another timely topic about fertilizer costs and certainly have one of the leading experts in the world on this topic. So look forward to an informative discussion about current issues facing Missouri's producers as it relates to fertilizer and crop prices. Got a couple of housekeeping items I want to cover real quick. As always, we'll have a time for a period of questions and answers at the end of today's program. We encourage you to submit as many questions as you would like, either by entering them in the chat function using the anonymous feature. You can also enter questions by hovering your mouse at the bottom of your screen. There should be a toolbar that appears with the Q&A logo. It might be at the top of your screen too, but somewhere in there. Questions can be emailed to me at bpbrown@missouri.edu as well, and we'll try to get to as many today as we possibly can in the time that we have at the end of the program. But feel free to submit those as we go through the webinar, and we'll get to them at the end of the program. Right before we came on, Josh was able to confirm with me, no need to worry about screenshotting. Slides will be available to you. We'll have them posted at the link that you all been working with to get registered and signed up for these webinars. Those can be found at fapri.missouri.edu under the Outreach tab, and then select 2025 Ag Lender webinars. We're a month into 2025, and I'm still on 2024 for some reason. So all the information as well as future webinars is posted at that link. It's one site shop there to get all the information you need. The other thing I want to remind you of, and I know at universities we talk a lot about evaluations, and I think sometimes we evaluate our audiences to death, and I do apologize for that. I do have a couple asks for you today. One is to be engaged in the presentation, follow along, and ask questions. The second one is to share the information that you learned today with others in the food and ag industry. And then my third ask is if you would please fill out our program evaluation at the end of today's program. It should pop up in your web browser when you exit the webinar. However, if it doesn't, there'll be a link in the follow-up email you receive. I please ask that you fill out the evaluation. It is anonymous. But we use these evaluations to see how well we did at meeting the program objectives. We use those to help keep program information relevant for future webinars, and also at universities we need these for program support dollars when we ask our bosses, hey, can we have some money to do these things? So if you wouldn't mind, it should take about 3 to 5 minutes. I think it's 12 questions. If you wouldn't mind filling out today's evaluation, I'd really appreciate it. And then the other thing I have to share today is this is our second of our spring University of Missouri Extension educational webinars planned for stakeholders of the College of Ag, Food, and Natural Resources. We're going to cover a lot of topics this spring. This was something we started last year and got a lot of good feedback to continue this series. We've had a lot of fun doing them, but we hope that you will share this information. And certainly if you want to share the links to register for these webinars with your clientele to help them increase their farm management skills, we encourage that and would welcome that as well. Recording of the first webinar can be found at the link that I showed you on the previous slide related to poultry and dairy markets from last week. So those are just some quick housekeeping items. We do have a couple of just interactive polls to learn a little bit more about you as our audience, and to also just kind of set up the stage for today. So I'm going to start with the first poll, and I'm going to go ahead and launch it so it should appear on your screen. But this question asks, what factors do you believe, or what factor do you believe has the most significant impact on global fertilizer prices? And I'll give you just a few seconds here to kind of answer this question. You might be tempted to answer multiple of these, and that's truthfully probably the correct answer. But I want to force you to pick one here in terms of what you think has the biggest impact on fertilizer prices in the market. So give you just a few seconds here, and then we'll share the results. And Josh, for you, when you get ready, if you have any commentary about any of these, we would welcome that too.
Yeah, I want to answer this, but I can't.
Yeah, as a moderator, I apologize. As a panelist, you can't answer it. So you just get to tell us your thoughts on the back
Ah,
end.
dang
Yeah,
it.
yeah, sorry. You don't have the luxury of anonymous responses here.
I was
All
gonna say I'm helping out MU. I feel like I'm back in class. I finally know the answer to a question. I can't answer it.
right, awesome. Yeah. Life's just silly sometimes, isn't it? Yeah. All right, let's go ahead and share the results. So for the majority of our audience, or the polarity here was supply chain disruptions, whether that be rail, barge, or ocean freight. Coming in second would be governmental regulations and policy at 25%, and then third, international tariffs. So Josh, we're going to go to the next one, but keep this in your mind, and I'll ask you maybe if you have any commentary or discussion about these, and if you're surprised by the audience results here. So that's the first one. Let's go to the second one here. So this one, let me back up to the second poll question. So this one's going to ask you, as you look ahead to 2025, so as audience members, do you think fertilizer prices, and I'm asking this kind of at the farm level, so sometimes we can see some differences depending on which price series we're talking about, but farm level prices, do you think they're going to move higher in 2025, move lower, stay the same as where they are right about now? I also have two options that, these are kind of the cop outs. So I apologize if I'm offending anybody, but the first cop out is that you follow the market but don't know the answer. And then the final one is you don't follow fertilizer markets and don't know. So if you take a few minutes here and answer these questions, we'd greatly appreciate it. And then we'll share the results. All right, just a couple more seconds here for anybody that's out there still waiting to participate. All right, let's go ahead and share the results. So for this audience, about half of you think prices are going to move higher than where they are at today. Luckily, Josh is here, and Josh is going to provide all clarity around this for us, which is really nice. Quite a few of you also say stay the same. And at least in parts of Missouri, some of our fertilizer prices right now are roughly about the same that they were last year, depending on the fertilizer type. So can understand why some people are saying that. And then one final one here for the intro. Thank you for participating in these. I do appreciate it. So we've got a third poll question. This one just asks about trends and really how you as a stakeholder, or we've got some producers on the audience, but quite a few of our audience today is ag service professionals. How do you stay up to date on the latest trends and developments in the fertilizer market? So you got a couple options here. Industry publications, farm press would be one of those. Online forums and communities, kind of like what we've got going on today. C, agriculture conferences and events. D, word of mouth, talking with local farmers at the coffee shop probably, or calling into the local ag supply company and just asking them, hey, kind of where's the trends in the fertilizer market going, and using that to kind of inform some of your decision making. So again, those are some of the questions. Some of you might want to answer multiple of these, but I'm going to force you to answer one. And so give you just a couple seconds here, and then we'll share the results. And Josh, this might be helpful to you too in terms of how you guys get information out. StoneX might actually have data on all these in terms of how
Mhm.
people get information, but sometimes I think it's just helpful to find out how
Yeah.
different audiences receive information. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and share the results. So it looks like about a third of our audience today just calls the local ag supply company and asks, "Hey, what's the trends? What's the outlook for the fertilizer market?" Quite a few people word of mouth, and I would agree with both of those. That was kind of my initial assumption heading into this, just because that's my family's farmers and that's how we do it. So I had a little bit of bias there. But thank you for participating. That's our last poll question for a while, and I certainly do appreciate you participating. Let me go ahead and introduce our keynote speaker, our speaker today. Growing up in northwestern Missouri on a family farm growing tobacco, crops, and cattle, Josh brings a unique perspective to the fertilizer markets with over 20 years of experience in the industry. Josh has operated in roles that have given him market perspective as a North American logistics specialist, US based nitrogen producer, and general manager of commerce in Melbourne, Australia. Josh and his team there at StoneX, which spans the globe, have worked hard to educate the market on how to use fertilizer futures markets to not only offset price risk, but also to be able to sell produce to farmers much sooner. Josh is a graduate of the University of Missouri and is an annual Dopey Challenge marathon runner. So if you have questions about that, ask him what the Dopey Challenge marathon is. We were talking about it a little bit before we started today. Josh, let me just say a deep thank you for being with us today. We really appreciate your time and your all you do, and we look forward to your presentation. So with that, take it away.
All right, man. Appreciate it. Yeah. So like you said, yeah, I grew up in Northwest Missouri and went to the University of Missouri. And honestly, I had all these grand ambitions. I was going to go, go to New York City and investment banking, all this other stuff. And came to be about the last part of my college career and suddenly had an opportunity to work in the ag industry. And as we always tend to do, got sucked right back into that. And that's where I've been ever since. I started day one. I graduated on Sunday. I started my job full time on the next day. And I've been in the fertilizer industry ever since. And I've had the opportunity to view this market from a lot of different points of view. Have done it from a domestic logistical point of view. I've done it from a domestic manufacturing point of view. I work for the biggest international trading company. I've worked in Melbourne, Australia, as the general manager of trade for a company down there and dealing with manufacturers all around the world. And came back here, and I had a choice to make. What am I going to do? Am I going to go back into the old role that I was used to, or am I going to try something new? And something that's always bothered me was, fertilizer was one of the biggest input cost per acre for our family operation. And just like the poll showed, a lot of it is word of mouth, or you just call up the retailer and say, well, what the heck do I do? And what I started to find out as I got into the industry is even they didn't really have a clue because in fertilizer, it's kind of an immature, kind of an early market, if you will, in that information is still kept. Information is seen as power, and power is seen as money. And so people don't want to share that information. They don't want to share their point of view because then that can be used against them, and other people can get in the middle of it. And I didn't care for that. And so I took a chance. I came here to Stone X and thought, you know what, this will give me a platform where I no longer have to worry about kissing up to manufacturers and things like that. I can go put out the information as I see fit and at least try to give everybody a different point of view. And it doesn't mean I'm right all the time. I can guarantee you I'm not, but I can give a little bit of a point of view that many other people might not be able to give you or might not want to give. So that's a lot of what we have done, in addition to trying to build the fertilizer futures markets and things like that. So one of the things, the very first question that he posted, what is the driving force behind a lot of the fertilizer? And you're right to sit there and say it's a lot of transportation and things like that. However, that's not been the case here recently. It has been in the past, but recently it's been a lot more government intervention. Now, whether that is due to gas flows being shut off going to Europe, whether that is exports being stopped, but the government has started to play a much bigger role. And that's what's really a problem with our industry today. We always like to look at these markets from a global free market point of view. But some of these players that are making the difference don't look at it that way. They're communist China, they're Russia, they're places like this. So unfortunately, we've got a lot of turmoil in this marketplace, and it just hasn't been getting a whole heck of a lot better. So one of the things I'm going to do is rather than focus on just Missouri, which I know a lot of us tend to do, I do it from time to time. I look out the window and say, "Oh, it's snowy, it's crappy, nobody's doing anything." We need to be looking at this market from a global point of view because we are part of the world market, whether we'd like to admit it or not. What happens globally happens here, and it doesn't matter where it is in the world, it makes a difference. So, starting with nitrogen, when we look at the nitrogen complex, you really have the three base products. You've got anhydrous, you've got urea, and you've got UAN. Urea is the biggest driver. It is the most widely produced. It is the most produced. Um, when you just look at it, it is the one that acts most like a commodity. It's just spread out all over the world. So you can't have small regions controlling a vast amount of the marketplace. And so we start looking to urea and saying, okay, what's going on there? Because that's really going to be what drives the marketplace. And the biggest thing with urea and the biggest thing I'm focusing on is China. And why is government interaction such a big deal? On the global urea marketplace, that export market is about 50 to 55 million tons per year. And normally speaking, China is about 5 to 5.5 million tons. The problem that we have been dealing with all of 2024, and now as we start 2025, China has stopped exporting. The globe has lost 10% of its export urea marketplace. And this 5 year bar, this little blue bar here, and I try not to kill everybody with graphs and charts and things like that, but these are important to see. This blue one is your 3 year average, going back to 2019 to 2021. This is the last time the markets were considered normal. 22, 23, and then all of a sudden, way, way, way down here, 2024. January through December, when they would normally export between 5 and 5.5 million tons, they export 266,000 tons. Guys, that left a massive hole in the global S&D. So people wonder, well, why are prices so high on nitrogen? Guys, we have a 5 million ton hole in supplies from 2024, and we're continuing to see that pattern repeat itself as we start in January. In February, we're not seeing any indication that they are returning. Why is this? China's communist. What is their goal? When they sat there and they looked at this, they said, we want to accomplish two things. We want lower domestic pricing and we want adequate domestic supplies. Rest of the world be damned. And they have done that. When you look at China, their urea price is the cheapest in the world, and it's not even a close second. And their and their inventories are at record levels. Now, there is getting to be a growing voice out there that says, oh, China's going to have to start exporting. They have so much booked up in stockpiles. They're going to choke on it. They have to start exporting. And that's a free market way of looking at things. But again, this is China. Are they going to sit there and look at the marketplace and say, okay, yeah, we're going to worry about the manufacturers. There's several of them, but we're going to worry about them, let them export and make them happy, which is going to drive that domestic price higher? Or are they going to say, I don't care about the few manufacturers. I care about the hundreds of millions of farmers that we have in our country. This has worked really, really well. We're going to continue this pattern. The issue is we don't know. China is very, very hard to get information from. And when somebody says, I know what's going to go on in China, guys, spoon salt, guys, it's very, very difficult to get good, accurate information from this country. So, one of the biggest drivers out there, we know very little of what they're planning on doing. Number two, Russia continues to invade Ukraine. This situation is not going on. Now, this is a big situation as far as gas flows going into Europe. We're going to talk about that in a second. But from a global anhydrous marketplace, this has been massive. Russia is the number one global urea exporter. They export about 8 million ton a year. They are the biggest UAN exporter, about 2 million ton a year. And they were the biggest global anhydrous exporter in 2021. Today, they're doing next to nothing. And the reason for that, and this is a map of Ukraine in case you don't recognize it, how they would move their product to the rest of the world is they would produce it here in Russia, and they would utilize a pipeline that goes here through the southeast of Ukraine, down all the way here to the Odessa region. They'd load ships and they'd ship it out to sea. How many tons do you think Ukraine has allowed them to ship through this pipeline after they started invading them? The answer is zero. All of a sudden, Russia went from being the biggest provider of anhydrous to the world marketplace to exporting nothing. And so not only has this thing been shut down, there's actually been some attacks on this eastern edge of it. So even if they were to find normal relations, which doesn't look likely in today's climate, even if that were to happen, there's a lot of repairs that need to be made. And trust me, that pipeline is low on the priority list. Now, Russia hasn't been taking this sitting down. They have been working on a couple new export facilities. One in New Zealand. This isn't a major one, as best we can tell, up around St. Petersburg, but this one down around Taman. This is going to be the one that kind of brings them back into the world market. And so eventually this will come on. We've been sitting there saying, oh, they're coming, they're coming, they're coming for months and months now. And when they do come back, emotionally speaking, the market is going to be like, wow, the biggest export in the world has come back. Prices should start to fall. But look at where Taman sits. This little piece right here, that's Crimea. Obviously, you've been hearing a lot in the news about how Ukraine's been successful in attacking targets, Moscow and well within Russian territory. Guys, Taman is a layup. And you think about an anhydrous facility and how delicate it is. If you guys have been around gas, you've nurse balls and things like that, you know what it means to have a pinhole leak in a hose. Imagine a facility that's designed to move millions of tons per year. You just send in a couple small drone attacks. It's not going to take a lot of explosives and put them right in the right spots and some piping and things like that. And all of a sudden, you're talking about that facility being down for a very long time. You've got to replace a lot of stuff. You got to do a lot of testing to make sure you haven't missed anything. You think about the gas cloud that comes out of something like that. So even though we're sitting there saying we think Taman comes online, we think that Russia comes back to the world market, you wake up one morning and find out, oh, Ukraine attacked that facility. It's offline for a while. They are back to doing nothing again. So these changes we see in the world, they absolutely make a difference here. Iranian production is offline. Iran is another country that is a major exporter. They were the number three exporter last year, or 2023, with about 4.8 million tons. They're normally about the same size as China. And again, years and years of sanctions and different issues that have gone on in the country, they have to have these gas supply shortages. And that's what's going on right now. We've seen them offline for quite a while, for a month plus, because of the gas supply issues. And we thought that they were going to be back by the middle of February. We haven't heard a single word about them coming back. As of today, we don't have a strong timeline on when they're getting back. So again, your number three global exporter is just not there right now. It's another supply shortage on the urea marketplace. And to further touch on this, since we're in the Middle East area, people always wonder, why do I spend so much time talking about the Middle East? Gosh, dang it, Josh, just quit. It's getting old. Well, I'm not going to, because in the world of urea, this doesn't touch on any of the other nitrogen products, just on urea. This map here, and this over here to the west, you've got North Africa, you got Algeria, Libya, Egypt. Over to the east, Iran, Saudi Arabia. But just to put this into context, this little piece of the global map accounts for 50% of global urea exports. Guys, one out of every 2 tons that gets shipped out to the world comes from these countries. And then you start to think about the shipment channels. We had a lot of issues in the Red Sea. There were ships getting attacked. In fact, the one that got attacked and eventually sunk is a fertilizer vessel. It had come from Saudi Arabia and was making its way up. Well, we talked about how bad that was, but at least the shippers were able to sit there and say, okay, rather than try and ship it through here, yes, this is cheaper. Yes, it's a shorter route. I can at least go around the south of Africa and I can get to the western part of the world that way. Think about the Persian Gulf over here. And if you guys were around back during the Gulf War, about how much the news lost their minds about the fear of Iraq attacking vessels. And look at how little oceanfront they have right here. It's barely a footprint, but it was a major, major fear back then because this is such a narrow waterway. You start attacking vessels, the vessel owners are going to say, well, I just won't ship there anymore. Guys, look at Iran. You wonder why we talk so much about the Middle East, and we talk especially about Iran and how dangerous it is. They control the entire northern and eastern seaboard of the Persian Gulf. You start to look at Strait of Hormuz, they control everything except for the UAE's little tip here on the south. If Iran really wants to mess with the Western world, they can start attacking ships. Now, the world is going to focus on the oil, but look at how many millions of tons of urea are produced and exported just in this little narrow waterway. So, again, these types of things, yes, it does look like things are calming down. We're seeing Israel and Palestine come back together, steps towards peace, yada, yada, yada. Things have calmed down, but we're one attack away from the whole thing blowing back up again. We have to keep our eyes on the Middle East because, again, a lot of the global urea and as such, a lot of the nitrogen market is determined by this little section. Europe. Europe is a region that people just never talked about for nitrogen. They produce enough to meet their own demand. They need to import a whole heck of a lot. It was just kind of a black hole. Nobody really worried about it. Well, that was before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And if you remember, the Nord Stream pipeline was a very, very big talking point. The Nord Stream pipeline was shipped all the Russian gas into Europe, gave them very low prices. If you looked at the Dutch TTF, values were $4, $5, $6 an MMBTU constantly. A lot like what Henry Hub has been here for a while. But as relations started to sour and Russia attacked Ukraine, shipments stopped. And then somebody, we don't know who, but somebody went and blew up the pipeline under the water. European gas prices went from single digits to a high of $103 an MMBTU equivalent. Now, fortunately, they have since fallen back, but we are still looking at a situation where about 25% of global or European production is still offline. And when you start to look at it, they produce about 15 million ton of urea per year, about 9 million ton of UAN. massive amount of anhydrous. If you start talking about 25% of these numbers, you're talking 3.5 million ton of urea, you're talking 2 million ton of UAN. So not only does this create a supply problem, but it's not like these farmers are going to sit there and say, well, shucks, I guess I just won't farm this year. All of a sudden now, Europe has become a major nitrogen buyer because they just are not producing it. And we're getting worried this will get worse before it gets better. Number one, the political climate in Europe is not great for nitrogen manufacturers. They're old facilities, that's old technology, it's sturdy technology. They like new, green stuff like that. So there's a very big fear that more and more of these plants are going to have to consider their future and say, it just may not be the place for us anymore. Number two, gas prices are still high. We don't know when this relations are going to return. And even if Russia and Europe were to sit there and say today, yes, we're back to normal, everything is great, we love each other, we still got to go fix the pipeline. That's not a quick fix. So production is going to be offline there for a while. It's just painting a picture where we sit there and we continue to compare our current production in Europe to what we consider normal. Normal may not be normal anymore. We may need to start writing off some of these facilities. And we saw this here recently. There's a plant in UK or a facility or a company in UK who said, listen, we're done. We're going to shut down the last anhydrous plant, mothball it, we're done. My fear is that's going to happen more and more, which creates Europe as a major buyer in competition with everybody else. That raises everybody else's price because there's more competition for the same ton. And a lot of folks will sit there and tell me, well, Josh, I don't care about the Dutch TTF here. I'm in Missouri. It doesn't matter to me. The Henry Hub is the one that matters. So we threw this graph together. And what this graph shows you, this bottom line here, Henry Hub, doesn't do a whole lot, right? It's pretty steady. It stays within a couple dollars. This green price with all the fluctuations, everything else, that's your Dutch TTF. That is your European natural gas price. This red line is NOLA urea. Now, I wasn't great at statistics and stuff like this when I was at MU, but I could hold my own. I didn't need to major in it to figure out which one has a lot more correlation. Guys, right now, Europe is kind of our swing producer for the world. And frankly speaking, that means that Henry Hub price is doing a lot more to dictate what is going on with prices. And as I sat there and said, here recently, Dutch TTF has been rising. So too has urea prices around the world. So we need to look at things around the world rather than what's happening in our backyard because they have a lot more impact. People say, well, what about here? We're producing for so much less. They ought to be selling it for less. Well, if we were to move our price any lower versus the world, we just start exporting everything because the manufacturer and the traders are going to sit there and go to the best marketplace, and we cannot lose those tons. So that is why we have to continue to look at it from this perspective. I understand we want to look at it and say, why aren't these 10 staying at home? That's what they ought to be doing. Unfortunately, guys, it's a global game. North America, I'm going to say this, and I don't mean that prices are cheap, but our urea pricing versus the world is cheap. Um, right now, and I didn't get these numbers updated for you because numbers have been moving so fast here recently. Current NOLA values are not 385. They're actually, I think the last one I saw trade was 415. Current Middle East value isn't 415. This morning it was reported manufactured sold 445. To put a Middle East price of 445 into context, and bear in mind, one of every 2 tons that we import into the U.S. marketplace comes from the Middle East, and we are not self-sufficient nitrogen. We are a net importer, but 1 out of every 2 tons that we import comes from the Middle East. So we watch that relationship very, very closely. A 445 Middle East price equates to roughly a 435, 440 loaded NOLA barge, New Orleans, Louisiana. 435, 440, and our current price is 415. Guys, we are still floating around at a discount to the rest of the world. And if the world is as tightly supplied as what we're talking about, where you're talking about lack of Chinese exports, lack of Iranian production, lack of European production, the world is extremely tight. Why would they want to send product here if they've got higher price netbacks around the rest of the world? And that's what's spooking me. We are sitting here at the middle of February. It takes 30 days to get a vessel to load in the Middle East and arrive on U.S. shores. So even if we got our price right and we started calling imports, those tons are not showing up until the middle of March at best. And that is if they have the product available to ship out. So globally, logistically, we think that spring is still a little ways away, right? 60 days, it'll be April 15th. And yeah, we got time to worry about it. That time is running out. So as I look at the urea marketplace, just a real quick recap. Unfortunately, when I look at the world, urea supplies are tight. When I look here domestically, I think supplies are tight, especially in the face of a growing corn acre. That's something we didn't touch on, but our number has jumped pretty substantially here since even the first of the year. And there's some folks that have thrown out 95, 96 million acres. Now, that's a bit of a stress case scenario, but it gives you an idea that the overall nitrogen demand number is growing at the worst time when we have very little time to prepare for it. So domestic and global supplies are tight. Demand continues to grow. You've got this gaping hole in global supplies with Europe, China, Iran. Global demand continues to stay solid. Unfortunately, this is why I think urea prices continue to hold here for at least a little while. Now, I'm going to say this through pre-plant. Side dress, it gets a little more wonky just because you don't quite know when the world is going to start to focus on that summer reset that we always see. But short term, and I'm going to call it short term next month or two, I think prices stay supported. UAN worries me. UAN has been taking a lot of their price cues from the urea marketplace, but I think UAN is in worse shape. The UAN global marketplace is much, much smaller because when you think about it, urea is easy to move. It's a dry good, right? You bag it, you ship it out to any country out there, even if farmers aren't technologically advanced. What do you see pictures of? It's them holding the bag and throwing it out by hand. Well, you can't do that with the liquid. Liquid is hard to move, it's expensive, it takes more technology to apply. So UAN has been latching on to the urea market and just following those trends up and down, but there has been more problems with UAN production. Again, when you look at Europe, 25% offline. Well, that 2 million ton means a lot more to UAN market than the 3.5 million does to the urea marketplace. Here domestically, we've had a lot of small production hiccups. And guys, these are normal. People like to say, oh, it's being done, it's man made, it's all this other stuff. No, it's not. With the margin these guys are making, they want to produce every single ton they could possibly produce. But nitrogen production is a very high stress, high temperature. It's a dangerous thing and it wears equipment out. And so we've had these little hiccups, but none of them on their own are a huge deal. But when you add them together, it's a few 100,000 ton that's missing, and that hurts. We are watching Trump and how they work with Russia. Now, it could be that he works well with them, no further tariffs, nothing like that, and they can continue to send product here. They have been our biggest importer. But if suddenly Putin and Trump go head to head and we start to put tariffs against Russia, Russia really doesn't have anywhere else to go around the world. They may have to shut off their production because just no destinations, and that's going to further hurt global S&D. So, like urea, prices should remain supported in the near term. Frankly speaking, I think UAN is actually going to start outperforming urea here in the next several weeks. And there's a conference that just wrapped up, and it's starting to sound like the rest of the market is coalescing around that idea. I think we've got some big UAN price increases coming. Now, again, you start taking side dress, middle, late May, those time frames. That's a little bit of a different look. But anything before that, it's just really hard to see why prices will fall. And anhydrous, loss of Russia is massive. But domestically, this acts a little bit more on its own. Our Midwest values act on its own. But we had a good fall. It was very unorthodox in the timing. It wasn't like it was a normal time period. I know we didn't turn a wheel until Thanksgiving week, but then Mother Nature let us get out there, and it was a fantastic run. So we emptied the system. We ran it till Christmas, which means we only have about 2.5 months to refill the system. And here we are growing that demand because we're adding more corn to the outlook. So I'm going to say this, and again, I don't mean it in this way, but anhydrous right now, from what I'm seeing, is cheap. And I say that because when I look at it versus urea on a price per pound of N basis, and I look at it versus UAN, it is cheap. It's a very steep discount in that relationship. I think we are going to see that price raise, but the manufacturers have to be worried because Mother Nature can say no. Anhydrous can be free, but the even if it's free, if Mother Nature is cold, it's wet. If you can't turn a wheel in the field, it doesn't make a difference. So the manufacturer is going to hold back a little bit. They're going to be a little more conservative with their anhydrous price increases, even with everything else going up, until they see one or two things. Either the sales come big or the shipments start big. And once they see one of those two things happen, I think you're going to see anhydrous prices grow with that. Unfortunately, the best numbers we had available to us was last summer when they started putting the fall prepay numbers out. Best deal was yesterday. The next best deal probably today, as far as that pre-plan anhydrous goes. Phosphate. For as large as the global nitrogen marketplace is, phosphate is very small. The top five exporting and producing countries control about 85 to 90% of the world. And so you look at it, Morocco, China, Saudi Arabia, Russia, and the US, that's really it. You go from the US at 2.5 million tons export, and that's not production, that's just exports. Jordan only does 600,000. Australia's only 300,000. Frankly, we didn't see fit to put any further countries on this list to make it a top 10 because they are so small, you wouldn't even see the line. So it's a much smaller marketplace. It's a much more condensed marketplace. So one of the things we always talk about is, well, the tariffs on Morocco and Russia, and frankly, China as well. That is why phosphate prices are so high. We are a massive premium to the rest of the world, and that is the exact reason. This price graph over here on the left-hand side, this is your global DAP values. We're the purple one. And if you notice, yeah, we're a little bit of a premium to the rest of the world, but not hugely so. Not when you look at the last two springs where we massively outperformed the rest of the world. We were these massive premiums because, again, you get in the spring, demand is there, you can't get any more imports coming, and we just moved to these huge, ridiculous premiums versus the rest of the world because supplies are so tight. We have not seen that so far this year. But as demand continues to come and it continues to build, this is something I am worried that starts happening. Globally speaking, China, again, is my number one watch point. They are typically globally the world's biggest exporter, but the Chinese government continues to play a part in that role. When you look at them versus historicals, again, you go back to 2019 and 2021, they're exporting about 9 to 10 million tons per year. Last year, about 6.5, 6.6 million tons. Now, frankly, that is nowhere near as bad as what the urea situation is. But the difference between what they exported last year and what they would normally do up around 10 million, that's still 3.5 million tons missing. And that is a huge chunk of supply that's just not in the world today. Number two, like I already talked about, the import duties continue to hamper the trade flows. Russia, Morocco, and China continue to be a massive conversation point. And when you go back prior to 2020, you look and see that Morocco was a huge, huge provider of product to us. Russia was a major provider. Saudi Arabia was starting to grow a little bit. And all of a sudden in 2020, that summer, import duties were requested. Early 2021, they were approved. Now all of a sudden, Morocco has gone to next to nothing. Russia has gone to next to nothing. And so you look at these top five exporters in the world. Well, we're number five. Three of the last four are gone. And a lot of people ask, well, why is Saudi Arabia still there? Why are they not touched? Well, the argument is that they are more of a level playing field competitor. The argument against these different countries, China was a Trump tariff during his first administration, unfair practices, things like that. When they looked at Morocco, it was an environmental thing, where when Mosaic produces phosphate in Florida, they have to pile the gypstacks, the byproduct of phosphate production, and they have to maintain the water and they have to reclaim the land. And this is a massive, massive undertaking. It's a hugely expensive undertaking. Well, in Morocco, the land is owned by the royal family, so that's kind of a non-cost. The gypstacks don't exist except they dump it in the ocean, so it's a different environmental standard. It's unfair to their point. Russia, it's an oligopoly, so we don't quite know what they're doing. The input costs are typically different than the rest of the world. And so that was the argument. It's unfair practices, and they've cut them out. Saudi Arabia didn't have either one of those, so they didn't ask for them. So the underlying issue is that Mosaic, our biggest phosphate producer in the U.S., held a 25% stake in the Modern company based in Saudi Arabia. And so why would you want to go ask for tariffs on the company you have a 25% ownership of? So quickly, we have seen that Saudi Arabia has become one of our biggest importers. It was an unnatural move, but because of these tariffs, because of these government interactions, that's what happened. Hurricanes Helene and Milton. Now, these are past things, but this is more just to show you how close to failure we were. The first hurricane came up here, and originally some of these spaghetti tracks had this thing slamming right into Tampa. And if you guys haven't been around the Tampa Orlando area, there's a lot of phosphate production right in this corridor, and this thing looked like it could slam right into the bay, right into production. It would destroy all their loading capabilities. It would destroy the town, all the mines, and everything like that. Fortunately for phosphate market, and not for the people in the path, this thing shifted left or west, and it went inland up around the panhandle. We thought, thank goodness, we dodged a bullet. Boy, that's about as close as we've ever come. And then the second one came, a very unnatural west to east movement. This thing looked like it was taking a dead shot. The first one was going to be more of a glancing blow. This thing looked like it was going to be as direct shot as Tampa Bay could ever see in its lifetime. At the final hour, the day before, this thing was going directly into it, and then it shifted slightly. It shifted just out to Sarasota. We are talking the difference of maybe 100 miles. If this thing is 100 miles north, this thing slams directly into it, shuts all that water into the bay, up into the inland, destroys all the workers' homes and everything, destroys the facilities, destroys the docks. 100 miles was the difference between we lost Tampa, Florida production for the foreseeable future, and everything was fine. Now, we did lose some production. There were some impacts because when hurricanes come through, you've got to shut down these types of facilities. You don't know where the storms are going. You got to allow your workers to go home, take care of their family. The storm passes, and even if it's not a direct shot, you still have wind, you still have rain, and everybody comes out of it and they clean up their property, they clean up their friends and neighbors and everybody else. It takes time. You can't expect them to show up the next day and start working again. So there was a little bit of a period that was lost. There's some production that was lost because of both of these storms, but we dodged a bullet twice. And a lot of the industry has no idea how close it came to failure. India. When we talk about China as the biggest global exporter, we've got to talk about the biggest importer as well. That's India. They have been light on stockpiles, and frankly, the government plays a massive part in the sourcing of phosphate around the world. And they have been on the wrong side of this thing since last summer, since summer 24. They started 2025 very light on stockpiles. They would normally have about 2 million tons sitting in the country. They only had about 1.2 based on estimates that we've seen. And we just finally saw the government call uncle and pin a 1 point, or what was it, 1.6 billion or 1.6 million ton DAP contract and 800,000 ton triple contract with Morocco. And it's all on formula pricing. It's February through December. But the world's biggest buyer, from my perspective, just said, you know what? We can't seem to get ahead of this marketplace. We can't call it. We're constantly behind it. We're making wrong decisions. Just lock the tons up, and the price will be what the price is. And the worry there is with this being on formula pricing, what kind of games will we see around the world with trading and stuff like that to impact this price, whether it be higher or lower? It's going to put a lot more uncertainty in my book as far as what a price movement means. For those that might use DAP, for those that might use MAP, this has been the big conversation. A lot of people who use MAP have been coming back to me and saying, Josh, you keep saying that phosphate's strong, but it's weak. My MAP price keeps falling. Well, DAP has been strong. The DAP is kind of the base phosphate product, and that price has been rising. In fact, this is, if I would extend this out, we've actually seen this jump over 600 bucks a ton. The reason MAP looks cheap in comparison is because it was a massive premium. Again, we've cut out China, Morocco, and Russia. We have cut any of our MAP imports. And as a result, inventories are extremely tight, and MAP has been moving to these massive premiums versus DAP as the pendulum swings back and forth. When it's even money or close to historical normal, a lot of demand switches to MAP. They like it. That's what their primary use is. And all of a sudden, there's too much demand. And so MAP moves to a massive premium versus DAP. And what does the market do? Well, I'm not paying those premiums. Heck with that. I'm going to switch back to DAP. Okay, you switch back and everybody does it. And all of a sudden, you see it move back to normal. And then we're back to MAP being a big premium. So we're seeing this massive pendulum swing back and forth as the market is chasing the next golden egg. When MAP is a big premium, everybody's switching to DAP. And when DAP is about the same price as MAP, everybody swings back to MAP. And I think we're going to continue to see these fluctuations in the marketplace going forward until we normalize global exports and global shipments again. This is just unfortunately something we're going to have to watch. So short-term phosphate, and I'm going to say short-term in terms of basically spring, because we're going to put on a lot of our phosphate here in the next, say, 45 days or so. By the time we hit April 1, we know we're all looking at our planners and saying, yeah, time to pull it out. Let's go. But the stage is already set. I see phosphate values rising. They have been rising. I think there's more to come as we start to figure out how tight things are. Again, a very good fall season. We ran a lot of product out. We ran till Christmas, meaning we only have about a couple months to refill the system. I just think there's a lot of reasons why prices are going to hold through spring. Once we get into planting, most of your phosphate season is done. Now we're focused on the summer, and that's going to be interesting. The price of phosphate is incredibly high no matter how you cut it. So interest costs are a thing. Price risk is a thing. And I think a lot of the market is just going to shut down and say, I don't even want to talk about phosphate until I have to. And that quietness, that lack of interest, that could put a lot of pressure on the thing, at least here domestically. And so it gets really hard for me as I start looking at May, June, July. It gets hard to kind of figure out how far down this could be. Ultimately speaking, as long as China isn't exporting, and Lord forbid they start to further reduce those exports to get their domestic pricing higher, or I'm sorry, lower, if they start doing that, it won't matter when and where our demand is. Global prices will rise as a result. But if left over on devices, we should see a pretty good reset this summer. Where it gets to, it's hard to tell, but that's what we're watching. Potash has been major in the news from the whole U.S. Canadian tariff situation. That said, again, this just gives you an idea who the biggest buyers are. So when we talk about Brazil in the potash market, they are the biggest buyer by far. China and US buying about the same at about 8 million tons, and so on and so forth. So just to give you an idea, when we talk about these different countries, this is why. But the first thing we're watching is the Israel-Hamas war finally coming to an end. They're having hostage exchange. It looks like everything's getting back to normal. When that attack happened against Israel, that Saturday morning, of course, I woke up and horrified by the devastation and killing and everything like that. After I put that aside, I finally started put the work view back into it, and I said, okay, what does this mean for fertilizer? Well, Israel doesn't really produce much of anything for nitrogen. They don't produce anything for phosphate. They're the fourth largest exporter of potash in the world. I didn't remember that. I knew that, but I didn't remember it. And so very quickly, the fear was, are we going to lose Israel? Because what we were seeing was obviously the entire region is always trying to attack Israel, trying to always go after them. But what they have done is they're going for the media attacks. They're not going for the fundamental attacks, which is indicative of a longer term war. If you're going to attack a nation with the idea of completely crippling them and make them ask for surrender, you start going after infrastructure, you start going after power, you start going after their production. Potash could be one of those things. If they go in, it's a simple little attack. It's probably very lightly guarded. And just like that, one morning we could wake up and our fourth biggest exporter in the world, sorry, there's attack. We have nothing to offer to the world. That didn't happen. They were going for the cities. They were going for the people. They wanted the ones they could put on videos and show their supporters, say, we got them. It was more of a topical attack, if you will. Not to say it's not an atrocity, not horrible, but it's just the way it is. So we could have lost the fourth biggest exporter, but fortunately, things are calming way, way down in that region. Number two, China continues to invest in Laos. And this is something most people don't even think about. Don't even think about Laos in terms of being an exporter. But again, look at China. They're the second largest buyer of potash in the world. And where do they get a lot of that? They get it from China or Canada, the biggest producer in the world. Well, they don't like that. They don't like the West. They want to go take Taiwan. And the West has been saying, don't you dare, we will cripple you in a way you've never seen. So if you're China, you want to get away from the West. You want to stop supporting the West, doing business with them. Well, you have Laos right there. And so they've been investing billions of dollars into Laos to build up their mines, to build their capacity in potash so that they can buy it all. And they can not have to buy anything from the West, from Canada. And so we have continued to see that be a thing. And so their numbers, Laos has been fairly low on the list. These numbers continue to grow. And that accomplishes two things for China. Number one, it reduces that reliance on the West. And number two, it builds their sphere of influence of the Asian marketplace. Those are both huge wins for the Chinese government. And this continues to be a thing. So for them, it's a big win because they don't have to buy from the West. But for the rest of the world, that increases production, that increases supply, that puts more pressure on the S&D, which helps lower pricing. So as a result, the rest of the world enjoys it. Belarus has struggled. Now, they were one of the world's largest potash exporters. They were number three, right behind Russia, and emphasis on the was. Now, before this all started to happen, I had no idea where it was on the map. I couldn't have told you where Belarus was. Had to study up on it. But then Belarus opened their borders to Russian troops along the south to go attack Kiev. They wanted a short thing. They wanted this thing over in 3 to 5 days, and they thought taking Kiev would accomplish that. And how do you want to come in from the east, which is a long way? No, just come in from the north. Belarus said okay, and very quickly lines were drawn. For their potash, this is incredibly hurtful because they were very reliant on Lithuania to produce their potash, ship it through Lithuania, out to their deep sea ports, out to the rest of the world. Lithuania is a Western country. And February 1st, I believe it was 2022, with a stroke of a pen, Lithuania shut this border down. They took back all of the Belarusian assets, all their facilities, everything that they owned within Lithuania, and this might as well have been the DMZ. They completely shut this down, and Belarusian potash had nowhere to go. There was no infrastructure through Latvia. They were not going to go west through Poland. Again, Poland's a Western country. They are not going to allow them, somebody who just allowed Russia to attack Ukraine. The infrastructure wasn't developed yet in Russia to do this, and Ukraine, of course, is not going to let them do it. They were landlocked. And so they quickly went from the third largest exporter in the world to nothing. Now they have continued to build it. They're not going to take this lane down. They're building a lot of infrastructure and they are starting to come back. They're shipping rail through Russia into China and places like that. They're seeing their tons return. There's some stuff that's going up around St. Petersburg, but they still have room to go. That is actually a good sign for global potash supplies because they're not even back to full strength and we've seen potash values down significantly. But the biggest thing that has been a worry here recently is this US Canada trade war. I cannot understate how important Canadian supplies are to our demand. Yes, we get a little bit of stuff from Russia, but for the most part, Canada provides everything. We produce a little bit, but not near enough to meet our demand. And so when we started looking at a February 1 tariff war, this was worrisome. We still had a lot of product we need to get brought down to put in place. We had a great fall. We emptied the system. We weren't filled yet. And if the tariffs went in, all of a sudden we saw shipments starting to stop. That was going to be a problem. We had spring coming at us right now. March 15th is typically when we start going hard. We didn't have time to shift our supply routes to other places around the world. We just didn't have the time capable. The best thing that happened was agreement was made and they shifted those tariffs to March 1. By March 1, we should see the vast majority of our potash brought into the country, be placed in the storage, and everything taken care of. And by that point, now we're looking at the late spring, summer, fall. That's a tremendously long time that if the tariffs do get put into place, and Canada tries to say, well, US buyers, you're going to pay the tariff rate, which is what the contracts are starting to say, we can say, fine, we'll go to Russia, we'll go to Israel, we'll go to all these other countries around the world, and we'll see if we can buy it cheaper there. We'll let you know. We have that optionality. But had that thing happened on February 1, we didn't have a choice. If Canada said jump, we would have said how high. And frankly, we have seen manufacturers taking advantage of this. They're saying, well, the price needs to rise because of the tariff. And the market's like, well, yeah, okay, that makes sense. And they take the flat price up. But then these contracts are also saying, oh, by the way, if there's a tariff, you'll pay that price as well. So they're double dipping it. They're using the emotion and the worry and everything in the marketplace to push the potash pricing up. And if they were to try and push the price up on fundamentals, I would not have been shocked. And frankly, a little supportive of it. Potash prices were very low. There's a lot of things supporting the value. But the fact that they're kind of double dipping is really what kind of irks me. But unfortunately, that's the world we're living in. The best thing about the potash market right now is the fact there's even more production coming. Right now, when I look at the global S&D, very well supplied versus demand, and it's going to get more supplied. There is more product coming online in Canada. There's a new mine by BHP. Russia is continuing to expand their production. Belarus is still not back to full tilt. Laos continues to build more production. So Potash is the one product I can look at and tell you it is very well supplied today. And frankly, I think in the next 2, 3, 4 years, we will be having a discussion about whether or not potash is oversupplied globally. And oversupplied means very, very good things for farmers and buyers around the world. That means prices stay low. So the potash outlook, do not be surprised if you see some potash values starting to rise. We have seen some increases here in the last week or two. The market has just taken advantage of some of this emotional turmoil. Once spring is over, I think you see prices start to fall back again. They were very, very good versus historical values versus grains and everything like that. And I think we'll get back to that. I think there's just going to be a lot of people saying, I don't need to buy anything. There's more than enough to go around. I'll just wait and see what happens. That pushes that onus back on the manufacturer and gets them to have to lower the price to go find demand. So I don't know if anybody follows me like on Twitter or anything like that, but I have a little bit different point of view on how we see value in the marketplace. And I'll go through this very, very quickly. Hit me up later if you need more explanation of this. But I hate flat pricing. The reason being is that a flat price it elicits an emotional response. There's never a grain price high enough. There's never a fertilizer price low enough. I mean, if you go today and sit there and say, "Hey, I can get you $5 for all your corn this year," the immediate reaction is, "Well, I want 550 now." Well, what if we can get 550? Well, I want six. And the same thing on fertilizer. What if I can get you 400? Well, I want 300. And that's the emotion talking, just always trying to get a little bit more because it's hard, right? You know, you live and you breathe and you bleed for this crop. And it's hard to make money on the farm and everything like that. So, emotionally speaking, you always want a little bit more because of everything you've put into it. Rather than do that, I always try to take a little bit more of a fundamental approach to it, a little bit more like what manufacturing does. They don't try to buy the low and sell the high. They watch the inputs and outputs and they say when the value gets low between the two of them, that's where I want to start stepping in. And so we do the same thing with the markets and the grain and the inputs. Rather than trying to call the high and low, we look at the value. And frankly, it comes down to your input as a farmer is fertilizer. And then, frankly, it's diesel and seed and everything else, but I focus on the fertilizer. What's your output? It's grain. So a lot of the audiences all ask, guys, would you rather take this graph, for example? This is looking at New Orleans, Louisiana urea and new crop corn. So like right now this year so far, we're looking at December 25 corn. And if I told you, hey, would you rather spend 55 bushels or 135 bushels to pay for a ton of your urea? What would you rather do? And without fail, everybody thinks it's a trick question. It's too easy of a question. It's not, guys. Which one would you rather do? And everybody always says, well, I'd rather spend 55 bushels. I'd rather keep more bushels to myself. That's exactly right. That's where the value is. So why aren't we doing this in our farm marketing? Why aren't we doing this in terms of what the value of the fertilizers are? So unfortunately, I don't have a lot of great stuff to tell you in terms of where the values are today. They are all extremely high. When you look at urea, we're currently sitting at around 88. It's we haven't updated this week, but we're up around here. It is high, but when you look at the global supply issues, that's why the value is not fantastic. We ought to be looking for these little dips like summer 23. We were below 55. This is a stupidly good value. You look at 24 coming out of last spring, we had a great value. These are the things we need to be watching for. We look at UAN. It's a little more in line with recent years, but it's still on the higher side of what we consider normal. So if you're looking at your UAN saying, hey, this looks high priced, you're right. It is. And hydrous is actually looking pretty good. Again, I think this is a lot to say. And sorry, I've got Eastern Corn Belt over here. This should be Western Corn Belt, but this is at least in line. So this is a big reason why I think you're going to see anhydrous prices start to spike as the demand starts showing up. And I think that value is going to start kicking up around here, this 150, and that's going to be supported with a lot of value. Phosphate, if you look at your phosphate and you're like, man, this feels really wrong, what is wrong? Guys, today your DAP corn ratio is massively high. And this is the same ratio looking at every single week, but it just goes on a timeline. And everything in this gray box is about 50% going back to 2018. So right now, that value is some of the worst that we've seen in the last several years. What opportunity do we need to be looking at when we were down here? This is where we want to be building our soil levels. This is where we want to be buying more and putting it in the soil. You know, buy the phosphate, sell the grain against it, build that soil level so we can add this and pull from it when we get up here. Same thing for MAP. That's at least gotten back into normal range. But then potash. Potash had been stupidly good, and it's still well within range. It's still decently priced, even with the price increases that we've seen. But guys, tremendous opportunities there. It helps get away from that emotional response of it. But the last thoughts on everything I've been talking about, it's just prices are high around the world. A lot of people get angry when they look at it and say, well, this is heck, crap. It's only here. It's only the US. This is a world situation. And unfortunately, the world dictates the price, not us. We play a part in it, but we are not the one that dictates what happens to everything. Volatility is going to be the only constant in this changing world, which means when there's an opportunity that jumps up in front of you, we want to jump on it. We don't want to sit there and say, well, I get a little bit better. If you're wanting to look at it from that way, do layers. And frankly, if you look at some of the stuff I told you and you go, hey, I put in a layer at this really good value, and it was one of my worst decisions. Good. Call me and yell at me. And I'll smile at you the entire time because that means you just had yourself a hell of a year. But we got to jump on these opportunities. We can't just stick our head in the sand. We got to watch the world and we got to figure out what's going on to get ahead of these price movements. So, guys, I hope that gives you a little bit of insight on what's going on. I know this is a long presentation, but a lot of information to cover.
Well, thanks, John. Really appreciate, or Josh, sorry, not John, Josh. Really appreciate everything you shared. I thought that was really excellent, and I know our audience really appreciates it too. We're up against the 11 o'clock hour, so I appreciate everybody staying with us. I just have a couple of final comments, and certainly if you have any questions and you want to send them in, get those to me. I'll work with Josh, and we'll get some responses back to you if you have questions that you want asked. But again, really just appreciate your time today, Josh, for being with us and putting a program together. I have just a couple of announcements. I'm not going to ask you about the enterprise budgets. I was going to ask how many people were familiar with our MU extension budgets, but frankly, looking at the audience list, I harass all of you enough. So we'll skip this and just kind of I had a couple of slides here just promoting our budgets. Reminder that we have about 50 budgets that we do across all the different sectors, including row crops. As I was listening to Josh's presentation, I was somewhat relieved a little bit and also anxious about when we get around to do these budgets again this fall. It is really hard to come up with some of these estimates, and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out where I'm going to put my fertilizer price estimate, knowing that it's not the gospel, but just something to put in these budgets to look at profitability. So we do have them on the website. Again, they're downloadable. When you go, you can select the download. So we do have an irrigated and a dryland corn budget. We have a corn silage planting budget. And then we have some Southeast specific crops for our Southeast producers, just given that they have a little bit different of a management system down there as well. And so when you click on these links and you download all of them, there'll be an opportunity to pull up so now this is looking at dryland corn planting budget. There'll be an opportunity to download that budget. The other thing I want to point out is right up here where we see the Missouri crop budget Excel sheet. I think what I'm learning is that there's quite a few people out there that don't realize we have Excel spreadsheets that go along with each of our publications, each one of our budgets. The raw publication is like this. Every one of them is a 2-page front and back document. The front side just kind of goes through our expectations of per acre cost for the different categories. You can see our assumptions on the second page. So Josh is probably looking at some of my assumptions from fertilizer. Josh, I was doing this in October, so give me a little bit of grace when I was doing my fertilizer assumptions back in October. But you can see our assumptions there for fertilizer per pounds in Missouri, and then just kind of some of our rates. You'll notice, and I think this is historically what I'm finding is what most people have used these budgets for, is in the front side, right next to our estimates per acre, there's an opportunity for producers and lenders to sit down and put your estimates and add up your estimates for that. And I think that's how people have traditionally been doing these. But I want to remind everybody that we do have spreadsheets online. And if you go to that page, you can download the spreadsheet. It allows you to put in your assumptions for fertilizer and yields and seeding rates and stuff like that and make it pretty customizable. But the biggest change that we made this year that I think is super, super valuable is on the machinery assumptions tab. So all of those machinery assumptions are drop-down options to where you can pick your power and your implement, and it creates your not only your operating cost category, but also your ownership cost category. In my experience, this is the cost category that producers undervalue every time. They think their equipment costs are something like $30 an acre, and when we sit down and actually pencil it out, it's coming out to like $80 $80 an acre, $80, $90 an acre. And they're like, well, how in the world can that be? Well, there's just a lot of things that we forget to manage. And so I think our machinery additions this year were a really nice addition to those spreadsheets. Obviously, I'm biased, but I certainly think that they're a nice addition. Finally, if you have questions, feel free to email me at bpbrown@missouri.edu. I'll get with Josh if there's questions, and we'll get those sent back out to people. Just two announcements real quick. Our next webinar in this series is going to be on the macroeconomy. Courtney Colley is going to be joining us. We had the unfortunate scenario at the beginning of the year where Courtney was going to be with us, but then the Federal Reserve put blackout dates on certain members, especially members that are kind of like in the room, if you will. And so Courtney couldn't be with us that day. We've rescheduled for February 25th. Courtney is wonderful because she has such a great handle on the ag economy in Missouri, Kansas, Iowa, Nebraska. So look forward to her being with us to talk about kind of some of the macroeconomy things, but also as it relates to operating notes for farmers and lenders, as well as land values and where we see that going ahead. The other thing, two things. I said I had two. I really have three. And the second thing is we do ag lender programming in St. Louis and Kansas City. These are very different programs than the ones you all attended in the fall. If you have colleagues or bankers that want to learn a little bit more about the specialty crop industry and especially related to urban agriculture production, we have two offerings. Well, one offering now. One was yesterday. There's one in Kansas City coming up on the 20th of February. And then the final announcement I have is our Ag Lender School, which is a 3.5-day intensive program for new and beginning lenders. The registration for that is available and open. So if you have new employees, if we have new employees in your business or company, have them, or at least mention to them about this opportunity to get a better handle on lending, and especially as it relates to agriculture. So with that, there is an evaluation as you exit out of the program today. I kindly ask that you fill it out. Again, I hate asking for evaluations, but it really is how I justify my job. So if you like what I do, please fill it out. If you don't like what I do, don't fill it out. I say that tongue in cheek, of course. But as always, thank you very much for being with us today. We look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks when we have Courtney Colley. Well, actually not a couple. Yeah, a little under 2 weeks when we have Courtney Colley join us to talk about the macroeconomy, land values, and interest rates. And as always, be safe, be healthy, stay warm, and we'll see you around the state of Missouri very, very soon. So thanks, Josh. Really appreciate it. And thanks to everybody for listening today. We'll see you real soon.